You're listening to That Music Podcast with Bryson Tarvin, the curriculum designer and educational consultant behind That Music Teacher and the Elementary Music Summit. Each week, Bryson and his guests will dive into the reality of being an elementary music teacher and how music can truly be transformative in the lives of the students you serve. Show notes and resources mentioned in this episode can be found at thatmusicteacher.com.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to That Music Podcast. I am super excited to have David Bedard with us. If you watched him present at the Elementary Music Summit, whatever year that was, you will know how much of a just energetic, amazing human being this guy is. And we are super excited to talk about accessibility in the music classroom, which is very near and dear to my heart as well. So, David, hi. Thank you for joining us.
Hello. I am so happy to be here, and Bryson, I can't thank you enough for having me on.
For sure. Can we get started? For those people who don't know you, can you give us a little bit about yourself and what led you to kind of have this focus on accessibility in music education?
Of course. Well, to better understand what led me to focus on inclusivity and accessibility in the music education, there are sort of three brief things I'd like you to know about me in order to know what lenses I see this important work through. One, my personal lens is from someone who has and continues to benefit from the power of music. When reflecting on my own life's journey, I've come to realize that music has really provided me safe and comfortable spaces with supportive people, whether it's with my family or, growing up taking part in chorus in school or working during the summer times on a music theater camp in Lake George that did 3 musicals in a month's time, whether it was learning guitar from my father or being inspired by my own grandfather, who was very musical and played mandolin and violin and guitar and piano. I just feel fortunate that music has been a part of my early childhood, my adolescent years, and still now plays a large role in my adult life, which leads me to number 2. My lens is from someone who works with individuals of all kinds of abilities. A major reason I have a strong interest in accessibility in music is through my work with an outstanding nonprofit organization called Daniel's Music Foundation, for which I am appreciative and grateful to have been with for now 19 years. I can't believe.
Wild. I have to say that. That's a long time.
I know. I look at that number and I say, no, that can't be right. And I mean, at Daniel's Music Foundation, I'm surrounded by colleagues who also believe, just as you do, that music is really a right and not a privilege. I'm not afraid to say that again. Music really is a right and not a privilege. It's in New York City, and it offers free music lessons to individuals with all abilities through 50 group classes a semester, one-on-one instruction, as well as additional virtual opportunities, including open mics and dance parties. And, thanks to Daniel Trush and his family, the staff and faculty there, their donors, their board of directors, their advisory council. I'll put this out there in case if you ever find yourself in New York City, please look us up. If you ever want a tour of the space in Manhattan at 101st and Lexington, I know we'd be happy to show you around. And number 3, my lens is from someone who works with children ages 3 and 4 at a preschool. As a classroom preschool teacher, I am fortunate to witness the benefits of music in real time in those crucial early years. I'm consistently amazed to see how music can be a vehicle for learning, for fostering kindness, building community, empowering children's self-esteem and identity, and so much more. No matter what age or stage of life someone is in, music, I believe, should be accessible, and the opportunities for music education inclusive of all.
Wow, there's so much to go with right there. That is just we can end it right there. Perfect. I love that. And I love that. Well, I wrote down while you're talking, New York City meetup, because I'm actually going to be going to New York for the first time in a few months. And I was like, oh, I need to talk to David. So I'll be reaching out to you.
Yes. Oh, that would be amazing.
So before we dive in any deeper, I'd love to I would be remiss if I didn't share that you're going to be leading a masterclass inside that music teacher community where you're going to go even deeper on what we're talking about today. But we're going to go ahead and we'll share more about that later. But I did want to, kind of throw that out there. If you want to learn more about that, we'll have the link in the description as well. So, David, are you ready to dive in?
Oh yes. Oh yes.
Let's do it. So what do you think? I know this is the $1 million question. What are some of the biggest barriers that students face in traditional music education?
Oh, what a great question that is. As we know, there are so many barriers, students face in traditional music education. I recently was reading a study from Henley and Barton in the British Journal of Music Education. It was published in 2022 from Cambridge University Press, titled "Time for Change: Recurrent Barriers to Music Education." And it identified barriers that should come as no surprise to you or I or those listening. Location, funding, collaboration, those transitional points. Sometimes you're leaving, early childhood and you're going to middle school. Do you carry that musicianship with you? And then, one of the big points I thought from the study that I found kind of fascinating was the lack of pupil or participant voice and involvement. As one young participant in the study was quoted saying, you need to start listening to young people and stop making decisions, having decisions by adults who think that they know best. Leaving that room for student agency, I think, is a great way to tear down a major barrier within our classes.
Yeah, I think that's something that is so overarching in just the general question of how can we make music education better, period, is give students agency, regardless of, what that means. I think so many conversations I've had with other people, whether it be about, cultural relevancy or just making it relevant to the student's life or keeping engagement up, it all comes back to getting students agency. And I think that is something that is especially important when we come to when we're talking about accessibility in the music classroom, because I think it can be really easy oftentimes to feel like we need to make those decisions, when the reality is we don't need to be the person making the decisions. We have students that are in the trenches that likely are able to tell us, at least in some way, what they want and what they need and how we can better serve them, rather than us kind of guessing and checking constantly.
Absolutely. And it just shows that we have that trust in them when we provide that space, and I think that comes to an even harder point where, some students don't even see themselves as musicians, even from an early start. There was a workshop I once attended where this was in the form of arts, and the facilitator of the presentation, looked around the room and said, please raise your hand if you feel like you are an artist. And sadly, very few hands went up in this room full of educators. And, the facilitator shared that when you ask the same question of young children, many more hands excitedly go up. And slowly with time, less hands go up when you ask them who out there is an artist. And I feel that the same holds true if we were to ask people if they believe that they were a musician.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. The really, really heavy stuff, honestly. Like that is really true. I think, conversations that I have just, like on the daily, when you're getting your hair cut, or at least a topic of conversation. Oh, you're an elementary music teacher. Oh, you teach the recorder. Like all these things kind of always happen, but it does there's usually an aspect of, but I can't sing in tune, or, but I don't do that anymore. And I think that is a real shame. And I think that there are a lot of reasons for it, but I hope we can at least kind of make some effort to make it a little bit better in the future.
Yes. And think of what a world it would be if the adults in our students' lives were also exploring their own musicianship and coming along for the same journey.
Yeah, without getting too far on a tangent, that right there, I think, would have the biggest impact on music education, is just having children see adults making music. Because so often we see students that are like, well, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to do that. Because they don't see, especially when we're thinking about, traditional masculinity, like that's something we often don't see. We don't see, I'm not going to sing, singing's for girls. Well, we've all heard it. And I think, again, we're getting kind of on a tangent here, but you mentioned it and I really wanted to touch on it because it's so important of just music is for everyone. We just need to make sure that people understand that and see themselves represented in it. So again, I I don't want to go too far on that tangent. So bringing it back a little bit to accessibility, I would love for you to share. Is there a specific moment or experience that really solidified for you the importance of paying attention to accessibility in your teaching?
Yes, when I think of the many years and things, so many of these episodic memories come to mind, and I still cherish them to this day. I find that it's during those moments of true connection and respect that they pop out. One specifically that comes to mind is a student that I've known for a long time. He's an adult, has autism, and often engages in echolalia or repeating of words or phrases spoken by others. When asked if he wanted to sing something for everyone, he would repeat, sing something, sing something. But finally, one time when asked, I feel like you should never give up. You never know what comes when it's a new day. He said, he didn't say sing something. He said sunshine. And so I asked, do you want to sing "You Are My Sunshine"? And he looked up and he said yes with the sort of glimmer in his eye, knowing that it gave a great place to go on from. It was like this shared connection and respect, as I had said, and it allowed for a great place. He sang it on his own, and if I wanted to scaffold, what forte could we do? It piano? Could we sing it staccato? Could we sing it legato? We had some shared piece of music to take it there with. So finding those moments, I feel solidify how important it is to see where the person is that you're meeting, how you can meet them right where they are.
I mean, that right there, I feel like is the biggest change for me when I teaching, when I was thinking about accessibility, is coming from it from a place of how can I meet them where they are. And I think I think as educators, we get that. I think sometimes we struggle with, well, how do I do that? I lovingly refer to the scene from Schitt's Creek where Moira and David are making, folding in the cheese, and no one's really saying anything. And I feel like so often in education, that's how this conversation goes with accessibility and meeting, even just meeting people where they are. We're like, oh, we'll just meet them where they're at. What does that mean? Like, how do I do that? So I'd love to zoom in a little bit and give some simple strategies that are beyond a surface level of, we'll just make it more accessible. Not that that's what you're giving, but like, because I know that that's really what the rhetoric, a lot of the rhetoric is in the world. So what are some small, easy to implement changes that can have a big impact in creating an inclusive classroom?
Well, first off, I mean, I think everyone should go out and watch more Schitt's Creek. It's maybe one of my favorite shows. But no, certainly, I think it boils down to the deeper the students or the class that you work with, the more you can jump off from. That investment of getting to know the people in your class, and filling it with lessons that have that hallmark of a good activity where it allows for self-expression, so you do get to know, really informs you. For example, I find that it's sort of like, if you're going through your material, you're coming up with new material, you're attending one of your amazing summits and learning new things, and you might say, because your students so well, oh, it's almost like you're going shopping. That would be a great gift for so-and-so. That person would latch onto that part of that activity so well. So I feel like so much of it comes down with this overlooked idea of just knowing who is in your group and how well you know them, so that when something does present itself, you can say, oh, that would be a puzzle piece fit. Or you go and try it and it doesn't work, but it works for someone you didn't think it would work for. So I find that investment goes a really long way and can start as easy with, just having a plain notebook or Google Doc, and it has everyone's name on the top. And as soon as you discover, oh, wow, so-and-so really responds to that song by Adele, I'm going to remember that, because when we're talking about time signatures down the line, I can pull back to that fact I know about them. Never underestimate the power of the facts and the strengths that you gather from each person who's in your cohort.
Yeah, I feel like it can be really easy to feel like we need to have specific strategies, earmarked for certain students, when the reality is sometimes it's just like having an understanding of who they are. One of my former students, what I loved about this is it was actually in his IEP, like in just kind of like a general notes, or like just as like general context of like that he loves movies like Vivo and Encanto and things like that. So I knew with this student, and I knew this personally from knowing him, that like if he was ever starting to like go towards the edge of not being successful or needing, not being able to access things, like how can I get that joint attention back? One of the big ways was by singing one of those songs, or it's an easy connect that I could bring in very quickly, that it wasn't a, well, here's how you differentiate this. It was just like, this is how this, something that can help this student connect more to what's going on with them. And I think that whenever we can kind of collect those nuggets, like that is really where we can start applying them. And honestly, just sometimes it's really just like, is this going to work? I think it will. Let's figure it out and let's see if it does. Just like you said, sometimes you have a strategy or this idea that you have, like, oh, this would be really good for so and so, and then it's not, but it ends up helping another student or being successful or whatever. Like it really, teaching really is a lot of iterating and just kind of guessing and checking sometimes, because based on all of the information that you have. And I think that's a really good kind of tidbit from what you just shared, of just like how can we keep track of the stuff that we notice that lights these kids up.
And it's like you said too, sometimes when you know that one thing, maybe you pivot to that, and then it allows you to pivot right back to where you were hoping the group would go. And it's sort of like this field trip, and you want to make sure everyone is coming along, and you don't want to leave anyone behind. But sometimes making that quick detour stop from the exit sign you just saw so you can get right back on the highway is just what you needed, and what the group appreciates too.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
I'm gonna Midwestern myself. So here in Ohio, we have this thing called Grandpa's Cheese Barn. I'm not sure if you've ever heard of it, but it's exactly what it sounds like. And it's it's like right off the highway. It is this giant barn where you can get any sort of cheese flavor, whatever you want. And it's the same kind of thing. Like no one's stopping at that exit. There's nothing to do at that exit except for buy cheese. But like it's always popping, because sometimes that's just what you need. You need some pickle flavored cheese. I can't believe I
If
brought
you're
that up, but
coming
here
to
we
New
are.
York, I mean, I feel like I need to come to Grandpa's Cheese Barn. That
Let's do it.
sounds amazing to me.
We'll do a cultural exchange. So once we've kind of started figuring out what are some things that, some things that students are resonating with, or some strategies that we feel, like I love how you use the analogy of going shopping. What are some ways that you would suggest, or some things that teachers can do to adapt instruments, movement activities, notation, whatever we're working on, to better support students with disabilities?
Sure. I'm going to try to be as specific as possible for music activities. I really like to preface the activity by saying, please choose movements that feel comfortable and feel good, to both you and your body. Giving that freedom of knowing, I trust that you know what's best for you, I think is an important message to share. And you could sort of kind of take note of, what has felt comfortable for that student, so that, if you're calling upon everyone to do fill in the blank, well, they've never really done that before when you've opened it up for free exploration of it. But I always allow that space of, listen, choose what feels best to you in your body. For notation, I feel like, you're only limited by your imagination. There's so many ways, whether you color code things or this and that. For instruments, this one's one of my favorite. For for stringed instruments, of course, I'm preaching to the choir over here, but I mean, the way that you tune them can be remarkably, so that somebody who, just requires one finger to make the same chords their peers are making to feel part of the group, it's still right in line. Or, maybe your instrument choice for that person is different. Maybe you're choosing an auto harp where they're pressing more or less a button in order to achieve that chord. And then one of my favorite tricks to have up my sleeves is, it sounds silly, but I'll share it with you because this I know is a safe space, is I always like to have a single hole punch, and I like to have various colors of painter's tape. And I love just, as soon as I press it through, I save that dot that has come out from pressing it. And that makes a great fretboard marker. Or
that's brilliant.
You could put it next to the holes on a recorder. So if I say, all right, cover red holes, or, I'll line up the ukulele dots. So, now we're playing the green chord, now we're playing the pink chord, that sort of thing. Never underestimate some painter's tape that's colorful. Allow the person to choose what color they want it to be. It doesn't always need to be that the G chord is red and the D chord is blue. You can, that, again, that feels very powerful to someone who feels like, they want to say in what's being done. But I tell you, a single hole punch and some painter's tape has not steered me wrong.
That is brilliant. I've done it where I've taken like the binder hole reinforcers and some colors and used those around the recorder holes, but I never would have thought about using tape, because that way the color doesn't come off. And again, it's perfect size.
And I've never thought of the reinforced hole punch for around there. So I'm also taking notes. I have my pen and paper in mind. So I mean, this just goes to show that we're always adding to what we have. And the more educators have this opportunity to speak with one another, the more passing of ideas, takes place. And I always admire what you do for that reason, where someone might feel so isolated, if not for, the service and the meaningful work that you provide to so many. So thank you.
I really appreciate that, because that really is why we do what we do here at That Music Teacher, is because Music Teacher Island gets boring and it gets lonesome, and it feels like we're screaming into the void together.
Mm-hmm.
Which, speaking of, I keep looking over and our backgrounds are so similar. I feel like we're both in the same void right now. So I just had to share that because I've been thinking of it the whole time. But yeah, I think you really bring up a good point, which is like, you're just constantly picking up new ideas, and they might not work. They might work. You might have to adapt them to your environment. Some of my best strategies are ones that I've seen in a general education setting, that I was like, oh, like we could do that with music. Like, sure, why not? And then some of them are the exact opposite. I see that they work, and I go, oh, that I really don't think that'll work, but like that gave me this new idea that I think would work a little better. So I know that I personally have quite a few of these, but are there any common myths or misconceptions about accessibility that you'd like to address?
Yes. One that I only just thought of because of what you just said. I would also encourage people to not discard a tactic or something that they think would work, because your student might be different from today to tomorrow. Or, don't be so quick to crumple it up and throw it in the wastebasket when that same idea would work wonderfully next year with a different cohort of students. So I would encourage you not to say, listen, this didn't work once, so it's never going to work. Know that maybe for the right student, it would be what reaches them. And I would say one of the big, myths or misconceptions about accessibility is that it only benefits, people with disabilities, when in reality, you and I know that it benefits everyone. If you provide bonus visual cues for something, not only are those students that extra needed benefiting, but maybe it's solidifying for that student that is kind of glancing off to the side, referencing it too, or it's another way to think about the music being presented. An example that I found that I was like, oh, this is me entirely. You brought up Schitt's Creek before. I'm really into Severance at the moment. So I have noticed that the closed captioning is, I'm not visually impaired, I'm not blind. This is not something that, or not for those things. But if I'm deaf, and I'm reading the words presented on the screen, but yet it still helps me because I know that what I read, I retain more than what I hear solely. So by hearing it and seeing it, it is stronger than if I were just hearing it. So I think that's a great example of, here's this thing that you might think is exclusively for one audience of individuals, when really it could benefit anyone who finds that helpful.
Yeah, and kind of taking it one step further, removing a barrier for one person doesn't add one to another. And I think that's something that quite frankly in a lot of aspects right now is the rhetoric that we're hearing. And the reality is, you know, it, I talk about universal design a lot because it really encompasses so much of what I believe about accessibility, which is just like if there's no reason for a barrier to exist, break it down. We don't need it. Like let's get to the core of like what we actually want with this. And what I love about that is sometimes we will accidentally make our classroom more accessible for a student when we were really focusing on this student over here. For one of the things that I talk a lot about is over the ear headphones. In my classroom, I had like 15 pairs of them, which is a little excessive for some teachers. They might think that, but like for me, I wanted it to be anyone at any point can get them. One, I think that's important just because let's not say, oh, Johnny, you like grab these headphones, you're overstimulated, but like it really makes it doesn't other that student that really gets a benefit out of it. But also I've noticed that there are students that maybe they have a migraine that day and they don't normally receive any benefit from having those headphones. But if you're at a migraine, we have 28 third graders with glockenspiels, it's going to be not fun. So by having those available, having that, like, nobody's hurt by the fact that my students have noise canceling headphones. Like that doesn't make it any worse. It doesn't make it any harder for anybody else. It just is something that is available to help those that need it. And I think that is one of the big things that I would love to get across about accessibility is that it's not us versus them. It's just us.
Yes, yes. And I love that example because by allowing the other students to do that same thing, it's just showing that's a resource. It completely welcomes it as another tool in your group's box to help make things better. Because when you make it better for one or more, you're making it better for everyone. It's really great what you've done.
So, David, I know that we're only scratching the surface here. So, in your masterclass that you're going to be leading inside that music teacher community, you're going to be diving in even deeper. Without giving too much away, can you share a little bit about what attendees might expect to learn?
Sure, of course. Attendees can expect to, expand their mindset about who accessibility and inclusion is really for and who it benefits. Spoiler alert, it's for everyone. Attendees can expect to be called on to reflect on their own practices, as they really are the experts when it comes to knowing their students. And attendees can expect to have some tools ready so that when, something that would come up that would benefit the group for both the individual, but as the group as a whole, you're able to feel free enough to take those risks in making modifications so that, it may not always work, but at least you feel free enough to try it.
I love that. So what's one key takeaway that you hope people walk away after the session?
Yes. I think it goes back to what you were saying, because I think that hit the nail on the head. Because if you have that belief, so much for you is possible, that all people, regardless of having a disability or not, can certainly benefit from adaptations, modifications, customizations that allow for the highest level of participation, engagement, and satisfaction as a musician. We all have our idiosyncrasies. I know I do. And I feel like when they're validated, acknowledged, and recognized in a safe space, it frees us to be ourselves.
I love that. David, this has been a great conversation. And again, it's not one that's really going to ever have an end. I think it's just going to be a constant a constant conversation that's hopefully getting heard by new people along the ways, and then they share their own little tidbits as they pass it on. So if there are people that are looking to keep this conversation going with you specifically, where can our listeners connect with you if they want to learn more?
Of course, of course. Listeners can find me and message me on LinkedIn if they look up David Bedard, or email me at dbedardschool@gmail.com. I love staying in contact, so please, I'm not scary or intimidating. I don't think all 5'4" of me. So please reach out.
And for those who want to start making their classrooms a little bit more accessible today, what is one small change that they can implement right away?
Sure, sure. I would say those two are so crucial. I know you asked for one. Here I'm slipping an
We'll give you
additional
two.
one in. That having that notebook that's dedicated to just getting to know, maybe a whole day has gone by, but you learned one thing about one person, put it right in there. Keeping a record of what resonates with the students you teach and what their strengths are is going to help you. And again, never underestimate the power of a few rolls of a few rolls of painter's tape and a hole punch. These simple things, I'm sure you're filled with so many of those things to do, and that you can also share with other educators, those tips and tricks that Bryson is filled with, and you are as well, to share with the community. So hold on to those and know that they're valuable, not only to you but to others you share them with.
David, thank you so much for joining us today and sharing what is clearly an important work that needs to happen and needs to continue to happen in our field. So we really appreciate you sharing with us today.
Oh, and thank you again for having me on and doing this most important and meaningful work.
For sure. Thank you so much for listening. We are so excited to have David inside the community. So if you want to have a deeper dive in his masterclass, please check out the link in the description. With that being said, if you haven't left us a review on iTunes, YouTube, wherever you're listening, it would mean the world to us if you were to give us a 5-star review. Let us know what you're liking about it. And as always, thank you so much for making a difference in the lives of the students that you teach.